the unthinkable just happened. In the hallowed halls of the Veridia City courtroom, a pregnant wife was just publicly assaulted by her husband's mistress. Bam! A slap that echoed, not just off the paneled walls, but across the entire city. You think you know stories of betrayal? You haven't seen anything yet. In the next few minutes of this story, we're peeling back the layers of a scandal so deep, so twisted, it'll make your head spin. This isn't just about an affair. Oh no. It's about a shocking secret that billionaire CEO Damien Thorne and his perfectly polished circle tried to bury. What was it? And why did it drive Isolde Moreau, the glamorous mistress, to such a brazen act of violence in front of flashing cameras and a stunned judge? The clock is ticking, and the fallout from this single shocking moment is about to change everything. Forget what you think you know about the rich and powerful. We're talking about a carefully constructed empire on the brink of collapse, a family fortune hanging in the balance, and an unborn child's fate decided in the crossfire. You absolutely cannot afford to miss how this unravels, because the biggest surprise isn't just the slap, but who pulls the strings when the mighty fall. Are you ready to witness the truth? The kind of truth that makes you question everything. This is the story of Elara Vance, Damien Thorne, and the mistress who lit the match. What dark secrets lie beneath the surface of Veridia City's elite, and when the dust settles from this courtroom inferno, who, if anyone, will be left standing? The outrage, the shock, the sheer audacity. It's all here. Don't look away. This is where the gilded facade shatters. Damien Thorne, frozen for a ghastly second, finally lurched to his feet, his face a mask of disbelief contorting into rage. He pointed a trembling finger, not at Elara, his pregnant wife now bearing the mark of another's violence, but directly at Isolde. His voice, a low growl that somehow sliced through the surrounding din, was unmistakable. You will not touch her again. But that was the explosion. How did it come to this? To truly understand the inferno that consumed the Thorne dynasty, we must first step into the gilded cage where the cracks, hairline at first, then gaping, began to form. Elara Vance thought her marriage to Damien Thorne, CEO of Thorne Consolidated, was a fortress. Turns out, it was a beautifully decorated prison built on a bedrock of pure, unadulterated lies. Imagine this. Life in the Thorne Citadel, a glass and steel spear piercing the Veridia City skyline, overlooking the dark, impassive Obsidian River. Pure envy fuel for most. Elara, with her quiet grace, a stark contrast to Damien's relentless, almost brutal ambition. She, from the unassuming earth of Silverwood Creek. He, the inheritor of Augustus Thorne's sprawling empire, a man who walked like he owned the very air everyone breathed. And let's be real, he mostly did. But even gold can tarnish. A deep marital unease had started to creep in like a silent fog. Damien's business trips, more frequent. The destinations, more exotic. Monaco, Shanghai, Dubai. Always plausible excuses, right? Yet even home, he was a ghost, lost in late-night, hushed phone calls. His voice a low murmur she could never quite catch. Then came the pregnancy. Elara's secret joy, her hope for a bridge across the growing chasm. Instead, Damien drifted further. Friends, like the sharp-eyed Nina Chen, saw the storm clouds gathering, tried to drop subtle hints. Elara, bless her heart, clung to hope. She wanted to believe. Then the chilling discovery, the kind that rips denial away like a cheap Band-Aid. Damien, back from another conference. Elara, searching for a misplaced file in his travel bag, something mundane, and her fingers brushed against it. Small, hard, unfamiliar. An antique silver locket, definitely not hers. Heart-hammering, she drew it out, intricately carved, old-world, empty. But on the back, almost invisible, a looping inscription. Toujours à toi, I am. Always yours. I am. Elara's blood turned to ice. Isolde Moreau. The name hit her like a physical blow. A rising social media starlet, someone Damien had briefly met at a Thorne Consolidated charity gala. She remembered Isolde's hungry eyes, the way she'd practically draped herself over Damien. Coincidence? Hardly. The opulent bedroom of the Thorne Citadel felt like it was shrinking, suffocating her. Later she confronted him. Voice steady, locket in her palm like a grenade, with the pin pulled. Damien, what is this? He barely glanced. Ah, that, a dismissive wave. Misunderstanding, gift for a client, got mixed up. Too smooth, too practiced. His eyes, those usually laser-sharp eyes, wouldn't meet hers. They darted, evaded, and Elara, outwardly calm, felt the first undeniable crack shatter the gilded cage. Suspicion, a cold serpent uncoiled. The emotional turmoil was a silent, gathering hurricane. Her hand clutched that locket, the inscription burning into her skin, a single tear escaping as Veridia's lights mocked her from beyond the window. "Who are you, I am," she whispered, "and what in God's name do you mean to my husband?" The locket wasn't just jewelry. It was a declaration of war. Damien's lies were a suffocating blanket. She knew then, polite questions wouldn't cut it. If she wanted truth, she'd have to dig, no matter how damn ugly it got. The unveiling, a private investigator and a painful confirmation. That locket? It was more than a trinket. It was a gauntlet thrown down in Elara's gilded life. Her shock morphed into a cold, hard resolve. No more passive victim. Damien's lies about that antique silver locket were the final straw. If he wouldn't give her the truth, she'd damn well find it herself. Armed with that damning piece of silver and a heart full of dread, Elara Vance made the call that would change everything. She hired Julian Maddox. This wasn't some back-alley PI. Maddox was a legend whispered about in Veridia City's elite circles, the discreet ghost who unearthed the darkest secrets of the wealthiest families. Her cousin Maya Lynn, ever pragmatic, made the introduction. Maddox's office in the Artisan Quarter was a world away from the Onyx District. Damien favored. Professional, empathetic, but brutally direct. He listened as Elara, voice trembling, laid out Damien's suspicious behavior, the locket the centerpiece of her story. "Mrs. Thorne," Maddox said, his gaze steady, "I'll find what you're looking for, but be prepared. The truth can be a heavy weight." He wasn't wrong. Maddox got to work, swiftly. Updates, sterile and factual, chipped away at Elara's denial. Grainy photos. Damien, arm around a striking brunette, Isolde Moreau confirmed, exiting the Velvet Sparrow, an exclusive club famed for its discretion. Sharper, crueler images followed. Damien and Isolde intimate over dinner, a stolen kiss in the shadows. Then, the financials. Credit card statements from accounts Elara never knew existed. Lavish gifts, purchases from Opal Drive's priciest jewelers, lingerie boutiques Elara wouldn't dream of entering, hotel suites she'd never heard of. This wasn't a fling. This was a calculated, ongoing affair. Infidelity confirmed in cold, hard print. The day Maddox presented his final report, Elara sat in his quiet office. He slid a thick manila folder across the desk. Page after page of betrayal. Nausea washed over her. Shock. Then a cold, hard anger. The images of Damien and Isolde, laughing, touching, burned into her mind. Isolde, in one photo, wore a unique starburst diamond necklace, chillingly similar to an item on a receipt from Veridia City's most exclusive jeweler. A gift without a doubt. Devastation. Absolute. Elara fled to Silverwood Creek, to her mother, Elara Vance. Clara, strong and wise, listened. "Elara, my love," she said, voice firm. "You're carrying his child. Protect yourself. Protect that baby." The heartbreak was a physical ache, but Clara's words, the primal need to shield her unborn child, forged a new resolve. Tears could wait, action couldn't. With a steady hand she called Genevieve Dubois, a name synonymous with high-stakes divorce battles in Veridia City. Their first meeting? Dubois's stark office, the damning folder between them. Genevieve, sharp intellect gleaming in her eyes, studied Elara, her gaze lingering on the slight swell of pregnancy. "Mrs. Thorne," she said, voice devoid of pity, resonant with steel, "this will be a battle, a very public, very messy battle. Are you ready to fight?" Elara met her gaze, newfound steel in her own. "I am." The fight for her future, her child's future, had begun. But she had no idea just how calculating, how utterly dangerous her husband's mistress truly was. The other woman, ambition, manipulation, and a dangerous game. While Elara was arming herself for a legal war, a very different kind of campaign was being plotted across Veridia City. In a penthouse dripping with ill-gotten luxury, Isolde Izzy Moreau was weaving her own intricate web. Make no mistake, Isolde wasn't just a mistress. She was a predator in designer clothes, and Damien Thorne, with his bottomless bank account and societal clout, was her ultimate prize. His pregnant wife, Elara? An annoying, unforeseen complication in her grand, self-serving design. Really, how dare she exist? Isolde Moreau had clawed her way up from God knows where, leveraging a stunning face and a ruthless ambition into a burgeoning career as a Veridia City social media influencer. Her online persona screamed opulence, endless parties, exotic jaunts, fawning admirers. In her eyes, Elara Vance was wallpaper, dull, provincial, utterly undeserving of Damien's wealth. Elara was simply in the way. Their first meeting? A Thorne consolidated charity gala. Isolde, a vision in borrowed couture, had homed in on Damien like a heat-seeking missile. All wide-eyed admiration, a subtle touch here, a lingering gaze there. Textbook, and it worked. She quickly became his confidant, his escape from a life he found increasingly predictable. Damien, lonely in his gilded cage, jaded by corporate monotony, was easy prey. Isolde was vibrant, reckless, a dangerous, intoxicating thrill. Then Elara's pregnancy. That complicated things. A child? That was a tangible bond, a link Isolde couldn't just snap. This rivalry, this game for Damien, suddenly had terrifyingly high stakes. So Isolde upped the ante. She demanded more from Damien. Her own penthouse, which he, weak fool, partially financed, more expensive jewelry, grander gestures. Anything to solidify her claim. Her social media lit up with cryptic hints. Blurred photos of a man's expensive watch next to her champagne, glimpses of a powerful jawline in a darkened car. She wanted the world, and especially Elara, to see. Honestly, Bianca, Isolde complained one evening to her friend, fellow influencer Bianca Rossi, swirling champagne in her new penthouse, she's just so beige. Damien needs fire, darling, not a doormat from Silverwood Creek. It's only a matter of time. But even as she preened, a flicker of something, unease, crossed her perfect features. The pregnancy. It gnawed. What if it made Damien sentimental? What if it cut into her allowance? Her manipulation of Damien became an art form. He suggested, cooling things? Cue the waterworks. The screaming accusations, the threats of exposing everything, texts, photos, the lot, on her massive social media platform. During one explosive argument in his private office, after he dared to whisper the word discretion, Isolde's eyes had narrowed. "You think you're powerful, Damien," she'd hissed, voice a venomous whisper. "I have friends, associates, who expect me to deliver on my promises. They don't like loose ends, darling, and frankly, neither do I." The threat of connections far more dangerous than a scorned lover hung palpably in the air. Chilling. Caught between guilt for Elara and his increasingly toxic entanglement with Isolde, Damien did what weak men do. He threw money at the problem. A discretion allowance. Monthly. Substantial. Isolde accepted, of course. But it didn't buy silence. It bought her time, tightened her grip, made Damien even more pliable. She had him, and she knew it. Then, through her web of informants, Isolde heard the news. Elara had hired Genevieve Dubois. A slow, predatory smile spread across Isolde's lips as she met her own flawless reflection. "So," she murmured, the sound a soft, dangerous purr, "the little mouse wants to fight? Oh, this should be fun. Let the games begin." Her reflection stared back, eyes glittering with a chilling resolve. Elara Vance had just declared war. And Isolde Moreau? She was more than ready to meet her on the battlefield. A battlefield of her own damn choosing. The gauntlet is thrown, divorce papers and escalating threats. News of Elara's choice of legal counsel, the notoriously formidable Genevieve Dubois, hit Damien Thorne like a physical blow. It shattered his precarious double life. No more quiet indiscretions. No more easily bought silence. The battle for his fortune, his reputation, his entire future, was about to explode into a very public, very brutal war. And he knew, deep down, he was outmatched. The day Damien Thorne was officially served divorce papers, that wasn't just embarrassing. It was the first deafening shot in a conflict that threatened to consume Thorne consolidated itself. Picture this. The hushed, mahogany-paneled boardroom, stern-faced board members dissecting quarterly earnings. Then the interruption. A liveried process server, face impassive, striding in to deliver a crisp, legal-sized envelope directly into Damien's hand. The silence that followed was deafening. Whispers erupted the second the server departed, spreading like a virus through the corridors of power. For the first time in his charmed life, Damien felt the icy grip of true panic. What had he done? His first instinct? Damage control. He had to placate Elara somehow. He begged for a meeting, a private audience, a discreet cafe near Elysian Gardens. Elara arrived alone, her composure a fragile, beautiful shield. Damien, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like a costume, fumbled through an apology. Half admissions, veiled excuses, pathetic. But Elara, guided by Dubois and her own strengthening resolve, was a stone wall. Too many tears had fallen in private. "The next time we speak, Damien," she stated, her voice quiet but cutting, "it will be through our lawyers." She rose and walked away, leaving him in the wreckage of his own making. The legal machinery churned. Genevieve Dubois filed a comprehensive divorce petition. Damien's flagrant extramarital affair with Isolde Moreau, the emotional distress, the public humiliation, and front and center, the needs of the unborn child, substantial provisions for future care, Elara's rightful portion of marital assets. The Thorne family, never Elara's biggest fans, now faced a very public airing of their golden boy's dirty laundry. Damien, cornered, hired his own pit bull, Marcus Thorne, his ambitious, razor-sharp younger cousin. A move designed to keep it in the family, or just another layer of Thorne dysfunction? Marcus, eager to prove himself, fired back with an aggressive counterclaim. Elara's demands were excessive, opportunistic. The legal showdown was officially on, and the whole of Veridia City was grabbing its popcorn. Isolde Moreau, meanwhile, watched from her gilded cage, a volatile mix of thrill and alarm brewing within her. Elara being cast aside? Delicious. But a messy divorce? That could cripple Damien financially. What if Elara actually won big? Leaving Isolde with scraps? Unthinkable. Her own machinations kicked into high gear. A vicious slander campaign. Subtle whispers to her contacts in the city's gossip blogs. Elara was unstable, hysterical, an opportunist. All lies, of course. But Isolde knew the power of insinuation. Then, feeling her leverage with Damien slipping, she staged a dramatic confrontation at his corporate tower. "You will stand by me publicly, Damien," she hissed in a quiet corridor, her eyes blazing. "Ensure I am taken care of, or everything, every recording, every photo goes straight to VCN News. And trust me, darling," her lips curled, "I have everything." Damien was trapped. Elara's righteous legal battle on one side, Isolde's ruthless blackmail on the other. His own family, with Marcus now legally bound to defend the indefensible, simmering with resentment. As Elara, pregnant, stressed but resolute, prepared for the first preliminary court hearing, she had no idea of the fresh hell Isolde was about to unleash. Not through whispers, not through blogs, but in devastating, public person. Elara clutched her mother's hand as they approached the Veridia City Supreme Courthouse. She was fighting for her child's future. But a cold premonition gripped her. The real battle, the truly ugly one, was only just beginning. And her most dangerous enemy wouldn't be in any legal brief. She'd be there, in the flesh. Courtroom inferno, a calculated provocation and a shocking assault. Elara clutched her mother's hand, the imposing marble of the Veridia City Supreme Courthouse looming before them like a mausoleum of broken dreams. She was fighting for her child, yes, but as she stepped into that echoing hallway, a cold dread settled in her stomach. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a war for her very soul. And her most dangerous enemy, she instinctively knew, wouldn't be found in stacks of legal documents, but in the flesh dripping with malice. The air inside the courtroom buzzed, an electric tension you could almost taste. Reporters crammed the gallery, pens poised like daggers. This was the show Veridia City had been waiting for. And then Isolde Moreau made her entrance. Not as a witness. Oh no. This was a performance. A declaration of war. Her crimson dress, a deliberate slash of defiance against the courtroom's somber decorum, turned every single head. Uninvited, unnecessary, utterly provocative, Elara, seated beside Genevieve Dubois, felt a fresh wave of nausea. Damien, across the aisle with his cousin lawyer Marcus Thorne, looked like a man already defeated, his usual arrogance deflated. Judge Alistair Finch, a man legendary for his stern intolerance of theatrics, called the preliminary hearing to order. Spousal support. Child support. The usual dry-as-dust legal arguments began. Marcus Thorne, all aggressive bluster, tried to paint Elara as greedy, overreaching. Genevieve Dubois, cool and precise, dismantled his arguments one by one, her voice a quiet force as she laid bare Damien's infidelity, underscoring Elara's rightful claim. Especially with a child on the way, it was brutal. During a short recess, the tension boiled over. Isolde, who had been practically preening beside Damien, saw her chance. She deliberately ambushed Elara in the hallway. "Enjoying the pity party, darling?" Isolde sneered, her voice a venomous caress. Damien was bored. Utterly. He needed a real woman. Someone with, well, you wouldn't understand. Elara Vance, Elara's mother, tried to step in, but Isolde just shrugged her off. Elara, trembling, managed, "Have some respect, I'm carrying his child." Isolde's laugh was short, sharp, ugly. "That?" She glanced dismissively at Elara's belly. "That won't keep him shackled to you forever. Trust me." The hearing reconvened. The atmosphere was even more toxic. Judge Finch, clearly irritated, was about to make a preliminary ruling, and then Isolde stood up. A flagrant breach of every courtroom protocol. Your Honor, her voice no longer a purr, but shrill with desperation. You need to know the truth about Elara Vance. Her mental state, she's manipulative, unstable. Gasps. Judge Finch's gavel slammed. Sit down, Miss Moreau. You are not a party to this. Another outburst, and you will be held in contempt. But Isolde was beyond reason, high on her own reckless drama. She doesn't deserve a dime, she shrieked, pointing a perfectly manicured blood-red nail at Elara. She's been emotionally blackmailing Damien for years, using this baby as order. The gavel cracked again. Bailiff, remove Ms. Moreau. That was it. Elara, pushed past her limit, rose, gripping the table. How dare you, she cried, voice shaking. How dare you? She never finished. In a blinding, shocking instant that would be seared into Veridia City's collective memory and replayed endlessly on VCN News, Isolde lunged, feral, fast. Her open palm connected with Elara's cheek with a sickening crack. The courtroom gasped, a collective, horrified intake of breath. Elara staggered, a strangled cry escaping, one hand flying to her face, the other protectively, instinctively cradling her pregnant belly. Chaos. Absolute, unholy chaos. Clara screamed. Bailiff scrambled, and amidst it all, a strange detail. A distinguished older man in an expensive suit, previously unnoticed in the gallery, was seen by a sharp-eyed intern making a quick, surreptitious phone call. A flicker of a satisfied smirk on his lips. Then he was gone, melting into the panicked crowd. Who was he? And what was that call about? Another loose thread in an already tangled web. Before anyone could drag the snarling Isolde away, Damien Thorne finally reacted. He vaulted from his chair, his face a mask of chalky horror, and then he roared. A raw, visceral sound that cut through the pandemonium. Enough! He pointed a trembling finger at Isolde. Don't you ever touch my wife again! Judge Finch, his face crimson, bellowed for order. Bailiffs swarmed Isolde, restraining her as she thrashed, her crimson dress a vivid, violent splash. Elara, stunned, tears streaming, could only stare, the imprint of Isolde's hand burning on her cheek, her world reduced to pain and a terrifying fear for her unborn child. The courtroom inferno had reached its terrible, violent peak. And the scandal? It had just gone supernova. The reckoning, fallout, a closed hearing, and a tyrant's choice. The courtroom was sealed, the scene of the crime now an echo chamber of shock and disbelief. But the scandal? It had already breached those imposing marble walls, carried on the frantic clicks of illicit smartphone cameras and the breathless, hurried whispers of reporters scrambling for the scoop of the year. That slap wasn't just a physical assault. It was a media explosion, and its radioactive fallout would rain down on everyone involved, irrevocably changing their lives. In the immediate aftermath of the courtroom brawl, Veridia City was utterly ablaze with gossip, speculation, and no small amount of righteous indignation. For Elara, it was the horrifying escalation of a private nightmare into a very public crucifixion. For Damien, it was a brutal, inescapable public shaming. And for Isolde Moreau, the real, tangible consequences of her brazen, violent attack were only just beginning to materialize. This was the reckoning. The slap echoed far beyond those courtroom walls, igniting a media firestorm that would force a day of reckoning, sparing absolutely no one, not the aggressor, not the philanderer, and certainly not the wronged, pregnant wife. Within mere hours, headlines screamed across every digital newsfeed and tabloid. Thorne courtroom brawl. Mistress mauls magnate's pregnant wife. It was brutal. It was sensational. It was exactly what the city craved. Grainy, shaky smartphone footage, somehow leaked despite Judge Finch's strict no-camera policy, went viral, replaying Isolde's vicious assault and Damien's belated, roaring defense in an endless, horrifying loop. The court of public opinion, already simmering with distaste for Damien's rumored infidelities, delivered its verdict with swift and overwhelming condemnation of Isolde, while a wave of sympathy washed over Elara. Judge Alistair Finch, his judicial outrage a palpable force, was not far behind the public. He immediately scheduled a follow-up hearing. This wasn't just about the divorce anymore. Oh no. This was for contempt of court charges against Isolde Moreau, with potential criminal assault charges looming darkly on the horizon. The severity of the situation finally seemed to penetrate Damien Thorne's carefully constructed veneer of aristocratic detachment. He was, to put it mildly, in full-blown panic mode. Investors in Thorne Consolidated, already jittery, were now openly spooked. The board, their faces grim, held emergency closed-door meetings, issuing a stark ultimatum: manage this spiraling crisis, Damien, or step aside. His gilded world was crumbling. Fast. Isolde, ever the performer, attempted her own desperate brand of damage control. From the opulent cage of her penthouse, she posted a tearful, artfully smudged mascara video claiming provocation, alleging a torrent of verbal harassment from Elara that had pushed her to her absolute limits. It was a masterclass in manipulative deflection. But very few were buying it. The performance felt too polished, too self-serving. Major media outlets, smelling blood in the water, dangled offers of exclusive interviews, but her newly acquired and very expensive lawyer, Ellis McKnight, a man renowned for navigating Veridia City's messiest celebrity scandals, advised strict, immediate silence. Any further public statement could be catastrophic. Yet behind the scenes, Isolde Incorrigible continued to direct message influential gossip bloggers, feeding them a steady diet of half-truths and outright lies. Elara was a scheming gold digger, an unfit mother, cruelly hoping to tarnish Damien's good name for a bigger payout. It was a desperate, failing attempt to salvage her own rapidly imploding image. Predictably, major brands, once clamoring for her endorsement, began to quietly pause their deals, distancing themselves from the toxic fallout. For Elara, the days that followed were a terrifying blur of trauma and fear. Panic attacks became unwelcome, frequent visitors. The Thorne Citadel, once a symbol of her supposed fairy tale life, now felt like a besieged fortress, with a ravenous pack of reporters camped outside the lobby, their cameras flashing at every perceived movement. Sleep became a battlefield, her nights haunted by the grotesque image of Isolde's contorted face, the echo of that vicious slap. Her appetite vanished. Her doctor, Lena Hansen, her face etched with concern as she monitored Elara's increasingly high-risk pregnancy, sternly warned her about the debilitating, dangerous effects of stress on both her and the baby. But how, Elara wondered, could anyone avoid stress when their life's most intimate, painful betrayals were being dissected, debated, and distorted on every news channel and social media feed? Genevieve Dubois, a pillar of calm professionalism in the swirling chaos, moved swiftly to shield her client. She secured a restraining order against Isolde, legally barring her from any contact with Elara. The preliminary divorce hearing was, of course, postponed until after the assault and contempt case against Isolde concluded. Weeks later, a closed hearing was convened before Judge Finch. The preceding media frenzy necessitated minimal attendance. The principal parties, their respective attorneys, and a discreet but heavy security detail. Isolde Moreau, advised by Ellis McKnight, entered a plea of not guilty to the assault charge, audaciously claiming self-defense. Elara, utterly exhausted and desperate to avoid the further trauma of a grueling public criminal trial, reluctantly agreed, through Genevieve, to a plea deal for the assault, mandatory anger management classes, a hefty fine, and a significant number of community service hours. The contempt of court charge, however, stood firm. Judge Finch, his face a mask of stern disapproval, made his disgust with Isolde's conduct abundantly clear. Then came the moment everyone, especially Isolde, had been waiting for. The pivotal moment. Judge Finch, his gaze unwavering, turned to a pale and visibly shaken Damien Thorne. "Mr. Thorne," he demanded, his voice cutting through the tense silence of the courtroom, "what are your present intentions regarding Ms. Moreau, financially or otherwise, following the eventual dissolution of your marriage?" All eyes locked onto Damien. Isolde stared at him, a desperate, almost pleading look in her eyes. Elara held her breath, unsure what to expect, what to even hope for. After a long, agonizing pause that stretched for an eternity, Damien, his voice hoarse, finally spoke. "Your Honor," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "I intend to end my arrangement with Miss Moreau. Permanently. I recognize that this affair has caused irreparable harm to my wife and to my unborn child. I have no intention of any further entanglements." He then produced a formal, notarized statement, which Marcus Thorne read aloud, terminating any and all financial assistance to Isolde Moreau beyond a pre-agreed and surprisingly modest lump sum to cover her outstanding legal fees and assist with her relocation. Isolde's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Ellis McKnight attempted to interject, to negotiate, but Judge Finch, his patience clearly exhausted, cut him off sharply. "Miss Moreau is extraordinarily lucky not to be facing a custodial sentence," he intoned, his voice like chips of ice. "She assaulted a pregnant woman, in my courtroom. One more word on this matter, Mr. McKnight, and I will have you all removed." With that, the judge finalized a tentative divorce decree, one that heavily favored Elara. It awarded her substantial spousal support and generous child support, pending a full and thorough review of Damien's considerably diminished but still undeniably vast financial holdings. As the session officially closed, Isolde bolted from her seat. She glared at Damien, her eyes brimming with unshed tears of rage, then whipped around to face Elara, who sat, tearfully relieved but utterly, bone-deeply exhausted. It looked for a terrifying, heart-stopping moment, as if Isolde might lunge again, but the bailiffs, now hyper-alert and anticipating trouble, swiftly blocked her path. "You'll regret this," she spat, her voice trembling with impotent fury. "All of you." With that final, venomous threat, she stormed out of the courtroom, her expensive heels clicking in angry, defiant staccato on the marble floor, leaving Damien staring hollowly after her, a man visibly undone. Elara watched her go, a profound weariness settling over her. Damien had finally made a choice, however late, however coerced. But even in that moment of fragile, hard-won victory, a chilling sense of foreboding lingered. Isolde's parting words felt less like an empty threat and more like a dark, unsettling promise. The legal storm had passed its destructive peak, but Elara knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the emotional wreckage, the deep, invisible scars, would take far, far longer to clear. She had won, in a legal sense, but the victory felt hollow, heavy with the weight of all she had lost, and the profoundly uncertain future that now lay ahead for her and for her innocent, unborn child. A fragile dawn, scars, solace, and the birth of Aurora, Isolde's parting shriek, a final, desperate curse, echoed in the cold marble corridor and then was gone, swallowed by the indifferent city. The courtroom doors closed on a brutal chapter of public humiliation and private agony. For Elara Vance, the silence that descended in the ensuing weeks was not empty. It was sacred, a fragile space to begin the quiet, painful mending of a shattered life. The legal storm, with its thunderclaps of accusation and bolts of public shame, had passed its destructive peak. But Elara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that the emotional wreckage, the invisible, deeply ingrained scars of betrayal, would take far longer to clear. She had won, in a legal sense. A Pyrrhic victory, perhaps, heavy with the weight of what she had lost, but a victory nonetheless. And now, the uncertain future lay ahead, a path she would have to forge for herself and for her innocent, unborn child. The Thorne scandal, once the screaming headline on every VCN news broadcast, and the salacious obsession of Veridia City's elite, slowly began to fade from the voracious public consciousness, inevitably replaced by newer scandals, fresher outrages. Judge Finch's firm restrictions on media coverage of any further proceedings, coupled with the now permanent restraining order against Isolde Moreau, helped to mercifully dim the intense, unforgiving spotlight. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Elara could finally breathe, if only shallowly at first. She retreated to the comforting, unpretentious familiarity of Silverwood Creek, to her mother Clara's unwavering, silent support, and the peaceful, predictable rhythms of the countryside. Here, amidst the whispering trees and the gentle murmur of the creek she'd known since childhood, she focused on her healing journey and on the final, precious stages of her pregnancy. Regular visits with Dr. Lena Hansen, the renowned obstetrician who specialized in high-risk and high-stress pregnancies, provided both medical reassurance and a much-needed anchor of calm. Dr. Hansen, a woman of quiet strength and deep empathy, emphasized that stress management, however monumentally difficult under Elara's circumstances, was as vital to her well-being and that of her baby as any prescribed nutrition or enforced rest. So Elara began to incorporate long, contemplative walks along the familiar creek paths, gentle prenatal yoga in the sun-dappled haven of her mother's garden, and journaling, pouring her complex, often contradictory emotions onto the blank pages of a simple notebook. She clung to every kick, every flutter inside her belly, a silent, precious promise of new beginnings, a tangible manifestation of something beautiful and entirely untainted, emerging from the ashes of her pain. Meanwhile, the storm Damien had so carelessly sown continued to sweep through his own life with the destructive force of a wildfire. Though he managed, through the intricate legal maneuverings of his cousin Marcus Thorne and the lingering, almost tribal loyalty of some older, influential board members, to retain a seat on the board of Thorne Consolidated, he was unequivocally forced to step down as CEO. The board, their carefully chosen words dripping with corporate euphemism, cited a pressing, undeniable need to preserve public trust and corporate integrity in the devastating wake of the scandal. His replacement, Vivian Holloway, a longtime COO known for her sharp intellect, steely resolve, and an almost surgical lack of sentimentality, assumed leadership with a clear mandate: stabilize investor confidence and steer the battered company through the treacherous waters of its profound reputational mire. Damien, stripped of his coveted title and the accompanying, intoxicating illusion of invulnerability, retreated from public view. He began the painful, solitary, and entirely unfamiliar work of genuine reflection, of confronting the hollow man he had allowed himself to become. He wrote Elara letters, long, rambling, soul-bearing missives penned late into the night, filled with shame-faced remorse, admitting his myriad faults, recounting the pathetic emptiness he now felt for succumbing to vanity and the cheap, fleeting thrill of his sordid affair with Isolde. He expressed a desperate, almost childlike, desire to be a better man, to somehow become a worthy father to the child he had so carelessly endangered. Elara read them, often late at night. Sitting by the window of the nursery, she was meticulously, lovingly preparing, her hand resting gently on the curve of her belly. Sometimes she cried. For the man she had once loved so fiercely, for the bright promise of the marriage that was, for the beautiful shared dream that had died such an ugly, public death. Sometimes a sudden surge of residual anger would make her want to tear the letters into 1,000 pieces. Mostly, though, she simply folded them, placing them unanswered in a small, locked wooden box. Healing, she understood with a clarity born of deep pain, would take time, and forgiveness was not a trinket to be handed out simply because it was desperately requested. It had to be earned, if it was to be given at all. As for Isolde Moreau, she vanished from Veridia City's glittering, unforgiving social scene as quickly and dramatically as she had once so brazenly burst upon it. Her influencer career, a fragile construct built on a carefully curated facade of borrowed glamour and fleeting access, lay in utter, irreparable ruins. Whispers, carried on the fickle currents of gossip and gleeful schadenfreude, suggested she had fled to the sprawling, anonymous urban jungle of Los Angeles, perhaps attempting to reboot her tarnished brand in the even more competitive and far less forgiving influencer circles there. The occasional filtered, almost desperate-looking posts that reappeared weeks later on obscure, little-known platforms were a pale, pathetic imitation of her former carefully manufactured glamour. She was seen posing with obscure lesser-known brands, hawking dubious skincare lines and questionable dietary teas, her comment section often a brutal landscape of critical takedowns, mocking her fall from grace and questioning her continued relevance. Sponsors, predictably, had pulled out en masse. Endorsement deals evaporated like morning mist. Her once teeming circle of fawning, fair-weather friends thinned to almost nothing. The once rising socialite, the self-proclaimed queen of Veridia City's nightlife, had been spectacularly and very publicly knocked from her pedestal. And not even the most artful, expensive PR spin could resurrect her fallen, tarnished star. Her dangerous, selfish game had ended in a very public, very satisfying checkmate. For everyone but Isolde, that is. Back in the tranquil embrace of Silverwood Creek, Elara found a deep, healing solace in the simple, timeless rituals of preparing for motherhood. She transformed the sun-filled guest room into a serene, welcoming nursery, painting the walls in soothing, gentle pastels of mint green and soft, dreamy pink, painstakingly stenciling delicate silver stars and fluffy white clouds across the ceiling. Each evening, as twilight cast long, peaceful shadows across the valley, she would sit in the old, familiar wooden rocking chair by the crib. The very same chair Clara had rocked her in, a lifetime ago, rubbing her belly with gentle, loving strokes and reading children's books aloud, her voice a soft, comforting murmur, creating a world of warmth, safety, and unconditional love for the little girl who would soon arrive. Then one crisp, sun-drenched spring afternoon, a hesitant knock echoed through the modest, peaceful house. Clara opened the door, her expression carefully, deliberately unreadable. "Elara," she called softly, her voice neutral. It's Damien. He's here." Elara looked up from the whimsical baby mobile she'd been meticulously assembling, tiny, brightly colored felt animals dangling from its delicate arms. A complicated, loaded silence passed between mother and daughter. Clara instinctively straightened, her protective maternal instincts on high alert, ready to shield her daughter from any further pain. But Elara, with a newfound quiet strength that surprised even herself, held up a hand. "It's all right, Mama. I'll speak to him." Damien stood on the familiar porch, an almost unrecognizable figure of profound, awkward humility. Gone was the tailored, arrogant bravado, the innate air of effortless command. In its place was a man visibly subdued, almost broken, by the crushing weight of his own monumental mistakes. He held a trembling, slightly wilted bouquet of white lilies, the very same kind that had adorned their candlelit table the night he proposed, in what now felt like another life, another world. The delicate petals fluttered slightly in the gentle spring breeze, like a silent, mournful sigh. I'm sorry for just showing up," he stammered, his voice thick with an emotion Elara couldn't quite decipher. Was it remorse? Self-pity? Or just the dawning, terrifying realization of all he had irrevocably lost? "I know I've lost any right to expect kindness, any right at all. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Elara's heart, a landscape of carefully tended scars, stirred. Not with forgiveness, not yet. But with a faint, unwelcome flicker of something akin to memory, the ghost of the man she had once loved so desperately, so completely. She opened the screen door a little wider and stepped aside, a silent, non-committal invitation. They sat in the familiar, sunlit living room, the air thick and heavy with unspoken words, with the lingering ghosts of shared hopes and brutally shattered dreams. "I've set up a fund, Elara." Damien began carefully, his gaze fixed on his own nervously clasped hands. "A trust. Completely separate from any settlement. I wanted to make sure you and the baby, our baby, had everything you could possibly need, whether or not I'm involved." Elara stared into the cool, empty hearth, her expression unreadable. "That's generous, Damien," she said finally, her voice soft, carefully neutral. He continued, his words faltering, tumbling over each other in his haste. "I know I can't undo what I've done. The harm, the pain, but if there's any chance, Elara, any way at all, if I can be a part of our daughter's life, I'll do whatever it takes. Anything. I swear it." She was quiet for a long, long time, the only sound in the room, the rhythmic, comforting ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had marked the passage of her own childhood. She thought of Isolde's venom, of the searing sting of that slap in the courtroom, of every calculated lie, every casual betrayal that had chipped away at her trust, her love, her very sense of self. But then, she thought of the steady, reassuring rhythm of her baby's tiny heartbeat, a tiny drum of hope against her own. She thought of the innate, undeniable longing that she knew her child, their child, would one day have for a father. "I don't know what the future holds, Damien," she said at last, her voice soft but imbued with an unshakable firmness. "I truly don't, but I know this. She deserves a father who shows up. Not just when it's easy, not for appearances, not for a photo opportunity, but every single day, consistently, honestly." He looked up then, his eyes, those once arrogant, commanding eyes, now filled with a desperate, fragile hope. "I will," he nodded, almost reverently, his voice choked. "I will, Elara. I promise. I will." With Clara's quiet, unwavering support and Genevieve Dubois's sharp, meticulous legal counsel, Elara drafted a set of strict, non-negotiable co-parenting terms. Supervised visits, at first in neutral locations, mandatory ongoing counseling sessions for Damien, with progress reports submitted to Elara's legal team, and an absolute, unequivocal, legally binding disconnection from Isolde Moreau and any of her known associates, in every capacity, financial, social, or otherwise. Damien, to his credit, signed the agreement without protest, without a single requested amendment, his signature a shaky testament to his desperation, or perhaps, just perhaps, to a dawning, genuine remorse. Then on a crisp, sun-kissed April morning, As the first blush of true spring painted the sky over Silverwood Creek in hues of rose and gold, after 10 arduous transformative hours of labor, Elara Vance gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl. They named her Aurora, for the new dawn she represented. Holding her for the very first time, this tiny, perfect, miraculously resilient being, Elara wept. Not from pain, not anymore, but from an overwhelming, cleansing surge of relief and a love so profound, so all-encompassing, it seemed to fill every broken, scarred piece of her weary heart. Aurora's tiny, perfect fingers curled around her thumb, a feather-light touch, a silent whisper from the universe, a promise of new beginnings. Everything she had endured, every lie, every betrayal, every public humiliation, every private, soul-shattering tear, had somehow, inexplicably, led to this one radiant, perfect, transcendent moment. Damien arrived at the small, quiet community hospital hours later. He stood outside Elara's room for a long, long time, a solitary, hesitant figure, before finally, visibly, summoning the courage to enter. Elara was in the rocking chair by the window, cradling Aurora against her chest, her eyes closed, humming a soft, wordless lullaby. A picture of serene, weary contentment. Damien paused in the doorway, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, raw with a vulnerability Elara had never witnessed in him before. She studied him for a long moment, this man who had caused her so much unimaginable pain, yet who was, undeniably, inextricably linked to the precious new life nestled in her arms. He looked smaller somehow. More human. Less like the titan of industry, more like a man lost in a wilderness of his own making. She nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. Damien walked slowly, hesitantly towards them. He gently, reverently picked up his daughter, holding Aurora as if she were made of the most delicate, irreplaceable spun glass. She's perfect," he whispered, a single tear finally escaping, tracing a path down his cheek. "She is," Elara said, her voice soft but clear, devoid of accusation, yet firm with an undeniable truth. "And she's mine." He nodded, a deep, shuddering understanding passing through him, the weight of her words settling heavily upon his shoulders. "And I'll earn the right," he vowed, his gaze fixed on the tiny, sleeping, perfect face of his daughter, to be part of her life. "Day by day, I swear it." The tabloids, of course, would eventually, inevitably, catch wind of the birth. They would print their predictable, sensational headlines. Thorne heir born in wake of courtroom scandal, more drama for troubled tycoon. But Elara, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, genuinely didn't care. She wasn't living for the headlines anymore. She wasn't living in the shadow of Damien Thorne's betrayals or Isolde Moro's malice. She was living for Aurora. For joy. For the fragile, precious, hopeful light of this new dawn. Outside the window of her peaceful room in Silverwood Creek, the cherry blossoms had burst into glorious, defiant bloom, their delicate pink and white petals a soft, fragrant promise against the clear, bright April sky. Spring had arrived, not in grand, dramatic gestures, but in small, quiet, infinitely precious mercies. A baby's first contented sigh, a mother's steady, resilient heartbeat, and a new chapter, blooming slowly, beautifully, unexpectedly, from the fertile, well-tilled ground of profound pain and hard-won resilience. For Elara Vance, this wasn't a return to a shattered, irretrievable fairy tale. This was the beginning of a new kind of story, one forged in the fires of truth, tempered by the bitter steel of adversity, and written finally, irrevocably, in the vibrant, indelible ink of her own fiercely protected, unconditional love. A story where she and only she held the pen. As spring fully bloomed in the tranquil heart of Silverwood Creek, Elara held Aurora close, the tangible warmth of new life a profound, healing balm to old, deep wounds. The jarring echoes of the courtroom slap, the venom of Isolde's parting words, had begun to fade, replaced by the infinitely more precious sound of a baby's gentle, rhythmic breath and the quiet, steady thrum of a mother's resilient, fiercely loving heart. Her story, she realized with a clarity that was both startling and deeply comforting, was no longer one of betrayal and public shame, but of quiet strength, of profound resilience, written now in the vibrant, indelible ink of an unconditional, all-encompassing love. But what lessons, if any, truly linger when the public drama finally subsides and the Klieg lights dim? Echoes and reckonings, the enduring scars and strengths. As spring bloomed in Silverwood Creek, a fragile, hopeful dawn for Elara Vance, The echoes of that fateful courtroom slap began to fade from Veridia City's notoriously short collective memory, inevitably replaced by newer scandals, fresher outrages. Her story, however, was no longer defined by public betrayal and courtroom drama, but by a quiet, fierce resilience, written in the ink of unconditional love and the soft, steady rhythm of her daughter Aurora's gentle, contented breath. But what lessons, if any, truly lingered when the drama subsided and the headlines moved on to the next salacious spectacle? What became of the principal players in this destructive, high-stakes game of ambition, infidelity, and devastating consequence? The city moved on, as cities always do, but the echoes, they remained. The Thorne scandal, though a brief, lurid spectacle for Veridia City's insatiable appetite for gossip, left indelible, cautionary marks on its glittering, immoral elite. It served as a stark, deeply uncomfortable reminder that even immense wealth offers no true immunity from consequence, and that betrayal, more often than not, architects its own ruin, sometimes with a breathtaking, almost biblical sense of inevitability. The character fates, in the quiet aftermath, played out with an almost Grecian sense of tragic, or perhaps just, deserts. Elara Vance, the wronged wife, the woman publicly humiliated and privately devastated, emerged not broken, but forged, tempered, and ultimately strengthened in the unforgiving crucible of her suffering. She discovered a wellspring of inner fortitude, a core of steel she never knew she possessed. Her life, once so intricately, suffocatingly defined by Thorne and the opulent, echoing emptiness of the Thorne citadel, was now joyfully, fiercely dedicated to Aurora, to the quiet, profound miracle of motherhood, and to slowly, thoughtfully, and passionately building her own independent interior design brand, entirely on her own terms, guided by her own unique vision, a quiet but powerful symbol of resilience, triumphant. The scars, of course, remained, etched onto the landscape of her heart, but they were no longer weeping wounds. They were hard-won reminders of battles fought, of survival, of a mother's unconditional love prevailing against all odds. Thorne, the once untouchable philandering CEO, was humbled, stripped of his coveted title at the helm of Thorne Consolidated, his carefully constructed aura of invincibility shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He began the long, arduous, and deeply unfamiliar process of attempting to earn back trust, not as a titan of industry, a master of the universe, but simply as a father. His journey, if it was to be a true one, would be one of slow, painful, day-by-day atonement, forever marked, forever defined, by the catastrophic, far-reaching consequences of his reckless, selfish choices. Whether he could ever truly redeem himself in Elara's clear, knowing eyes, or perhaps more importantly, in his own, remained an open, deeply uncertain question. A daily struggle played out in the quiet humility of supervised visits and carefully, painfully worded conversations. And he sold Izzy Moreau. What of the ambitious social media influencer, the self-styled siren? She became a whispered cautionary tale, a fleeting anecdote shared in the glittering, exclusive salons she once so desperately frequented. Her ambition, so fierce and so untethered from any semblance of morality or basic human empathy, had led directly to her swift, ignominious, and very public downfall. Her star, so briefly, artificially incandescent, was extinguished, snuffed out like a cheap candle in a hurricane. She became a ghost in the opulent world she had so desperately coveted. Her influencer career in tatters, her carefully cultivated social circle evaporated like morning mist. Lingering rumors, tinged with schadenfreude, suggested she had fled to the sprawling, anonymous urban jungle of Los Angeles, pathetically attempting to reboot her tarnished brand amidst the even more ferocious competition of that city's influencer ecosystem, hawking lesser-known dubious brands and peddling a tired, unconvincing narrative of misunderstood victimhood. Her occasional, desperate social media posts were met mostly with public disdain and a collective, indifferent shrug. Her 15 minutes of infamy had well and truly and deservedly expired. The consequences of her actions were, in their own way, as absolute as the scandal she had so eagerly helped to ignite. The story, like all resonant human dramas, echoed with enduring universal themes: the insidious, destructive power of secrets and infidelity, the corrosive, insatiable nature of unchecked ambition, the searing, unforgettable pain of betrayal, and, perhaps most powerfully, the unexpected, often breathtaking strength found in the very depths of adversity. It spoke, too, to the profound complexities of forgiveness, the deeply personal choice to grant it, or the equally valid, often necessary, choice to withhold it, to protect one's own hard-won peace from further harm. Some threads in the tangled Thorne saga, as is often the case in the messy tapestry of real lives, remain tantalizingly loose. The full, untold story behind that antique silver locket with its cryptic French inscription, the true identity and ultimate motivations of the mysterious, smirking man in the courtroom gallery during Isolde's shocking assault. These were lingering whispers of other, unseen players, perhaps, in a larger, more intricate game. A subtle reminder that even in seemingly resolved dramas, questions can linger, fueling the city's collective imagination and underscoring the messy, often ultimately unknowable, nature of human affairs. What do you think their secrets were? Let me know in the comments below. Ultimately, Elara's story, a narrative born from the smoking ashes of a public inferno and a deeply private hell, whispers a timeless, empowering truth. Even the deepest, most soul-shattering betrayals can, paradoxically, forge an unbreakable, unexpected strength. It reminds us, doesn't it, that while storms will inevitably rage in every life, the power to find, or indeed to create, the rainbow afterward resides within each of us. This tale of one woman's harrowing journey through the fire and into the light is more than just a forgotten Veridia City scandal. It's a raw, powerful testament to the enduring, often underestimated capacity of the human heart to heal, to rebuild, and most importantly, to redefine happily ever after, entirely on its own resilient, courageous, and fiercely independent terms. And if Elara's story of resilience and new beginnings touched you, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone who might need a little reminder of their own strength, and subscribe for more real-life dramas that explore the incredible power of the human spirit. What part of Elara's journey resonated most with you? Drop your thoughts below. Let's talk about it.